Everybody. Good seeing everybody roll in on the list.
Is that Mary Ellen who just shouted out, hello, everybody?
Yes, it is.
Hey,
She's
Mary
always
Ellen.
very
I
friendly
recognize
and
the
open.
voice.
Hey Valerie, how you doing?
I'm good. Hey, Mary Ellen. Hey, Connie.
Nice.
Welcome, everybody. Hey, we're going to start right on time. Good to see all of you. And we like to keep our cameras on so we get to see your faces and get to know you and wave hello the way Mike Lubefeld is doing, Peter Finch is doing, and Valerie's doing, and Connie's doing, and Debbie's doing. It is Quay and Gail and Corey. It's really good to see all of you, and thank you for joining us today. We have a packed schedule, an exciting agenda today. And so we're going to start right in. Ray and I will act as the facilitators and keep things moving along as best we can with the stellar cast that's with us. And Ray, have you ever heard of VUCA World? Have you heard that concept?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It's one that definitely drives my daily life and the life of all those people in the squares on this whole thing.
Yeah, Ray, I want to start by thanking you. For those of you who did not get to hear Ray give his talk and lead a conversation on July 24th, it was brilliant. Just about leadership in the VUCA world. We have that recording. We can make sure that all of you get it if you'd like to see it. It's in Canvas. If you don't know how to access it, just send one of us a note. We'll make sure you get in there. But Ray, it was terrific and set this beautifully. Today's the second of what we're calling a soft launch.
Yes.
And then all of you put September 28th on your calendars. That will be our official launch where we'll spend a number of hours together going through the whole learner and figuring out what that means for the course of the year. Hey, Ray, I want to turn it over to you in a second, but I know you joined me in thanking everybody who's on the screen today. Talk about living in a VUCA world. You know, when you wrote that article and got such acclaim in School Administrator, everybody in this screen is living and breathing that every day. And we want to thank you all on behalf of ASA and SBN for the work you do every day. And you know, Ray and Bill and Valerie and Debbie and I were having a conversation, and Todd and Robert were having a conversation just yesterday about, you know, even though it's a VUCA world and even though there's so much going on in your lives, I'm so appreciative of the time you're taking today and over the course of this next year in catching a breath, pausing a little bit and thinking about how we could serve children in a better way. So in spite of all the culture wars and all the increasing pandemic anxieties, thank you for being here. And thank you for the work you do on behalf of children of America. Ray, you want to pick it up?
Well, I do. I want to just say also, I want to thank AASA because, you know, what we're doing in this work is we're creating a network of influencers, you know, a network of influencers focused on learning in 2025. It's pretty exciting. So yeah, let's get this thing rolling for today. And
you know, Ray, it just dawned on me, maybe we should introduce ourselves. I'm Ward Sherman, an Associate Executive Director at ASA, co-director with Ray. Why don't you introduce yourself?
And I'm Ray McNulty, and I work from what? No, I'm president of the Successful Practices Network, and our founder, Bill Daggett's one of the leaders here in the Learning 2025, and we're a partner of AASA on Learning 2025, and we're so proud to be that partner. So let's get it started, and we've started each of our events, which this is the second one. So the first one we started the same way, sharing the essential question. So if you think about it, it's what is the role of leadership in this work that we're doing? This whole idea of focusing on the whole child, no learner marginalized, future-driven work. This is really an important point. And when I think about leadership, I just want to say two quick things. One, the first thing I want to say is I love this quote by Francis Fry, who talks about leadership. And Francis says, leadership at its core is about making other people better as a result of your presence and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. And I think about this network of leaders, our ability to make other people better, all the people. That's the essential part of this work, and I'm thrilled about it. So that's where we're headed with this concept of the role of leadership. And today's objective is really, I look for my next slide to pop up. Today's objective is really the transformation of teaching and learning. And when I think about transformation. I think often about Bill and I when we've been working, when I was the dean at Southern New Hampshire University, we always talk about challenging the status quo, making sure that, we're not just doing things for the sake of doing them. And one of the struggles we have in education is we seem to layer new things on top of an old structure. And the focus of transformation is so critical. And so today we've got two great presenters. We're excited about it. And Mort, we're going to hand it off, aren't we?
We are. We're going to hand it off to Bill Daggett, who's going to hand it off to Dan. For those of you who don't know, Dan and Bill were our co-leads. They co-chair the commission, which set up this work. And so, Ray, it is really a great honor and pleasure to hand it off to our co-chair. Bill?
Yeah, there they are on the screen, both of them.
Thanks, Moore and Ray. Great you talked about VUCA last time and introduced it today, because I've been crisscrossing the nation the last 3 weeks doing a series of school openings. And it's so clear to me that the challenges and the pressure that our school administrators are feeling is really unprecedented. It was tough last year. In many ways, it's tougher this year. And I want to remind all of you that as we began to talk about the network, we said 3 things. Number one, you got to begin your work by first addressing our immediate challenges. And those challenges are COVID, they are masking or not masking, vaccine or not vaccine. And then build on what's working in your district. But at the same time, while you address those issues, keep an eye to the future, the year 2025. Because I'm reminded, as all of us understand, COVID changed the life of each and every educator and each and every student. During that same period of time, there's been extraordinary advances in artificial intelligence. And it's changing when, where, and how people will work, live, and interact. And one of the things we want to do during the coming year is make sure that we keep you apprised of all those, while at the same time, through our senior fellows, we really help you with your most immediate challenges today, and that we have a deep understanding of what's working in your district so that we can build upon them. This cannot be seen as another thing to do. This has to be seen as helping you solve today's problems, build on what's working, but truly, truly prepare kids for our future. To kick us off today, I want to turn to Dan Dominich. Dan, as Mort just said, was co-chair of the commission. He's the executive director of AASA. And Dan, as I turn it to you, on behalf of educators throughout the country, a personal thanks to you. I've seen over the last year what you have done to try to inform the White House, Congress, the U.S. Department of Education about the commission's recommendation and gain support for public education in this country. Under your leadership, AASA, in my opinion, Dan, is more critical than any time in our nation's history. So thanks to what you're doing and what your great leadership team is doing. Dan, I turn it to you.
Dan, you're on
Dan, you're on mute.
Dan, you're on mute.
Famous last words. You're on mute. Thank you very much, Bill, and thank you, Ray and Mort, and all of the staff members from both organizations that have been working together in make this event a reality. I remember back in January when we first had a meeting with the commission. I kind of introduced the meeting by challenging the commissioners to be bold in their recommendations. That we wanted recommendations that would truly make a difference. And those recommendations are basically summarized in the categories where we talk about the whole learner, where we talk about no student being marginalized, where we talk about being future driven. And indeed, the organizations are indeed bold, and it's a great opportunity. If there's a silver lining to this pandemic, it's the fact that we have seen such significant changes occur. This is the 3rd school year that is affected by this pandemic. 3rd school year. Think about the fact that there are seniors this year in our high schools that have lived through 3 school years of pandemic. The beginning at the very end, then all of last year, now at the beginning, and frankly, we're very concerned that this event is not going to be what we thought back in July, when it seemed that the infection rates were under control, more people were getting vaccinated. We see that that's not the case anymore. I hold regular meetings with our superintendents on this issue. We just had one yesterday with what we refer to as our ARP, the American Rescue Plan Committee. These are districts that are sharing with us how they are spending those ARP dollars. But it's looking as if, unfortunately, not the kind of year that we were hoping for. But until we get this thing under control, as we thought we were back in July, it's going to be a continuation, perhaps, of what we went through last year. But again, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to take advantage of a situation and make the appropriate changes. When we talk about the whole learner, in terms of the Learning 2025 idea, it's perfect. Right now, we see how important it is to consider the social and emotional needs of our children, along with the cognitive work that has to be done to help them recover from 3 years, basically, of an educational system that has gone through tremendous challenges, remote learning, hybrid models, forget the school calendar or the school year. So many changes that have taken place. And so to focus on these issues, there's the other issue of what we see in terms of the civic unrest, what we see in terms of students that are marginalized, and how can we protect them? How can we make sure that equity is part of that picture? And then, Bill does a great job. I love to listen to Bill when he makes his presentation, because when we talk about future driven, it gives us an insight into what education in the 21st century should look like. Because there's so many things that we continue to do that are not even 20th century. They go back to the 19th century. The way that we still continue to group kids by how old they are in terms of what they know or what they're capable of doing. A school calendar that doesn't make any sense. Tag the Carnegie units at the high school level, where we group kids by areas instead of the fact that we recognize there are so many things that need to take place as learning occurs. So thank you so much for so many of you, and I noticed that there's about 270 of you that are on this event today. Thank you for being part of it. Thank you for joining us on this journey to make our report a reality, to translate the words into action, and to make these things happen. And we do have 2 outstanding presenters with us today, and I have the pleasure of presenting the first one to you, and that's Carole Basile. And Carole is the Dean of the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. Prior to joining Arizona State, she was the Dean and Professor in the College of Education at the University of Missouri in St. Louis. As Dean at Arizona, her work has centered on redesigning the education workforce and changing practices in teacher and leadership preparation. The first time I met Carole, it was because I was so excited about the work that she's doing in Arizona in terms of the education workforce. We know, and by the way, that's part of the recommendations in terms of the commission's report, that we need to work on our education workforce, the diversity in the education workforce. And Carole is doing a great job in that area. We're so happy, Carole, that you're with us today and that you're going to share all of that great information with us. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure. Carole Basile.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. So Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, just to give you a sense, we are a college of education of about 7,600 students right now, about 350 faculty and staff. And so much of what we do obviously is preparing educators for all of you. And I would say probably about 4 years ago or so, see if I can get the slides to work. Ooh, there we go. about 4 years ago or so, it really occurred to us that, we were hearing about teacher shortage. We were hearing about all kinds of, things going on with, what's happening with, we don't have enough students coming in. We're seeing probably, a 35% shift. Let me go back here a minute, start at the beginning. In students who were coming into our program, we were seeing teachers that were leaving very quickly. And everybody was talking about recruitment and retention. And we kind of said, look, I'm not sure this is about recruitment or retention, that this is really not a teacher supply problem, but rather it's a workforce design problem. So we started looking at other pieces of this. So we looked at student achievement that you all are very well aware of. We looked at the changing demographics of both students, but not so much of teachers. We looked at teachers themselves, right? And in the state of Arizona, like many states, and this is, I think, the 4th state in which I've worked, there are 173 competencies that every single teacher has to know. And we continue to expect all of these teachers in this one teacher, one classroom model to know all of these things and to be all things to all people at all times. Again, so we saw this shift and decline in enrollments in teacher preparation. And so we said, look, can we do something different? Can we think about this in a very different way? And so we said, look, what if we thought about this as a workforce design problem, a workforce development problem? We said, what if we could provide all students with deeper and personalized learning by building teams of educators with distributed expertise and be able to empower those educators by developing new opportunities for role-based specialization and advancement? So we started to work on this big workforce challenge and said, what if we could do this? We're the largest teacher preparation program in the country. We have 2,800 of our 7,600 in teacher preparation. But what if we could really think about this in a very different way? So we set out to do that. We started thinking about what would this sort of continuum of educator roles look like? Who's out there now? How do we start to build these teams? How do we use our teacher preparation program as leverage with our partner school districts to be able to do this? But how do we move from this really untenable position that teachers are in of feeling like they have to be able to know everything and do everything to much more of a team-based approach? Now, none of this is new, and we admit that none of it's new. If you go back in the literature, there's a whole lot about teaming and team-based approaches and teacher collaboration and distributed expertise and distributed leadership. And so we started to look at all of that past and all of that research and say, look, there's some synergy here. Can we pull all this together? And is this the right moment in time to start thinking about what this might look like? So we started thinking about this continuum. And we started with thinking about on the far left of that continuum, people in the community. And are there people in that community, could be community educators, but are there new roles? There are people in schools who volunteer all the time. And can we think about who those people are, but can we really think about them in more technical kinds of positions? And so we started to say, look, we're a college of education that knows a lot and has a lot about how to teach. Can we begin to leverage all of the content that we have, break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces, take some of the theory out, and now we could start working with nonprofits and with others and think about who these community educators are, who come around professional teachers, but are much better support because they walk in and they actually have some kind of knowledge about how to teach. So we started to create things like nano courses and backpacks. We hope to get these out to a very general audience of people. We're working with nonprofits. We're working with schools that have high school programs for kids who have teacher academy programs that might want to use this to train up high school kids to go and work with elementary kids. We thought about this in terms of content experts. We thought about this in terms of people who may be in communities who are undereducated, but have a lot of knowledge around culture, around language, who could be trained up to come into schools. The next group then we've been talking about are paraprofessionals and how to move paraprofessionals again from sort of generalists to technicians. In healthcare, we've seen a lot of this happen. Right now, if you just Google healthcare professions that need an associate's degree, there are a ton of assistant kinds of roles that come up, but they're very, very technical. And it's everything from, nuclear medicine assistant to, thinking about radiology and all the kinds of technicians, right, that are now have new roles, but they're very specific roles. So we've been thinking about paraprofessionals and how we begin to use our content, our course content, to actually create those things which are badges and stackable and for paraprofessionals so that they can gain more technical kinds of knowledge around being a reading assistant, a math assistant, a socio-emotional learning coach, a lab facilitator, but giving them very, very specific roles to play. In teacher preparation, we've really changed our entire teacher preparation program. One on the side of now we allow our teacher candidates to garner specializations. We don't want them to walk out like we talk about as widget teachers, all knowing the same thing, all being the same. I need another elementary teacher, so let me just go find another elementary teacher. No, let me think about who that team is, who the grade level team is, who the vertical team is. Who do I really need to hire? What are their specializations? They don't all come out looking the same, and they have strengths and weaknesses like the rest of us. So how do we begin to think about what teacher preparation looks like? And on the clinical side of that, all of them, now we've got about, not all of them yet, but about 800 of them are now working in schools and school districts where they are also now working on these sort of grade level or again, vertical teams. So we're not prescriptive about what teams look like or how many, but we are placing teacher candidates now on teams that have multiple professional teachers so that they learn how to work as a team, but also because schools now also are thinking about this sort of idea that we could distribute expertise, that we could now be creating what we call team leads. So this is changing, fundamentally changing what teacher preparation looks like as well. These are the kinds of programmatic shifts that we've seen. I've pretty much talked about those in terms of team-based placements. And then we get to professional educators and this idea of distributed expertise. And so we're spending a lot of time with clinical teachers right now. We've got about 30 schools in Arizona that are building whole school models around team-based. And they're experimenting and exploring what that means, how their teachers then also garner specializations that they need, but really being now able to assess what it is, where do teachers have strengths, thinking now about not just here's a group of kids and here's your 30 kids and your 30 kids and your 30 kids, but here's a group of kids and how do we begin to build both the professional educator core around those kids, typically a larger number of kids, but then also where we've got teacher candidates, community educators, paraprofessionals, assistants, who now also begin to have some kind of expertise. We're also training people in those schools to be team leads. So what does it look like when somebody now has an opportunity to advance into what I think is a real teacher leader, but even better than that, right? Where districts are paying them a stipend to actually be the team lead, the person that really is looking at a group of 100 kids, looking at that data, helping to make decisions about curricular and instructional implications, what assessment looks like, how to group kids, thinking about logistical space management. It's really becoming a whole new job, as it were, for educators as we think about how this works and how teams begin to work. And then, of course, working with school leaders on then how to lead teams and how does that shift their thinking, right, from a typical flat organization to new ways of thinking about leadership and teams and distributed expertise. So the models are looking like this. So we don't prescribe what this looks like. We do have some elements. We do talk about the kinds of things that we want to see, but this shift from this one teacher and 25 or 30 kids, or in some countries we're working with 60 kids, to this, right? To here's a lead teacher, here's 2 certified teachers, maybe here's 3 of our teacher candidates, but here's a group of 75 kids. And around that group, maybe there's 3 special teachers, there's a title teacher, there's a special educator. More complexity as we see what schools and what teams are beginning to do. So here's an idea right around vertical teams of 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, trying to move away from age-based grades. And what does that mean when you have a lead teacher and 2 certified educators? And then you add in, right, to support, again, those professional teachers. We're trying to professionalize the profession. But you're adding in those people who bring the sort of added layers of expertise or real help from a technician perspective. So there are a number of these different models that we're creating and are being created in the schools that we're working with. And they're different because context matters. But we're beginning to see how people are beginning to shift from these kinds of models, right? 1 teacher, 1 classroom, to building. Here's a K1 team kind of model with a certified teacher in the middle. Another edition of this, right? Then they morph to really making that person a lead teacher, but here's 2 instructional assistants with 3 certified teachers on both sides. And all of this is being done in a way that really is cost neutral. In some places where you see our residents, some of these are actually paid. They're using vacancy dollars now to pay our teacher candidates. So they'll get 2 teacher candidates for the price of 1 certified teacher. And that brings more people into those classrooms as well. But we think about our teacher candidates in this kind of the same way we think about paraeducators. They're not quite there yet, but they're certainly a little bit closer than what we would normally think about as a paraeducator. In the future, we would hope that even paraeducators would come in at different levels. We have lots of ideas about thinking about paraeducators now, how they come in as trainees, how we help to train them up with different specializations in different ways. But again, getting them further to professional certification. We also have these 30 schools that are now whole school models. And so we're beginning to see what that looks like, both at elementary, at middle school. We do have high school models, 9th grade models in high schools where in the high schools, teachers are working as teams, whether it's in content or whether it's across around some integrated learning, but then bringing in people in the community that are bringing expert knowledge to those teams. Technology also plays a tremendous role here. Just as we think about high tech, high touch, and how technology is used both to help kids to personalize learning, as we think about blended learning, but also as we think about how to bring content experts in or community educators in to join classrooms remotely, that we have this technology, we still need to continue to use it. And how we use it and how we bring people in and how we partner to make sure that, again, that it's not just this one teacher that we're dependent on as the right teacher, but that really it's a whole cadre of educators we're really thinking, again, as Dan and Mort and others have talked about, this whole child approach. We have to think about who's the right team of educators, the right team of adults for a group of kids. We also think this has tremendous implications as we think about issues of equity. That as we think about building an education workforce, right, that is broader, that is more inclusive, that allows for greater diversity of people to surround children, particularly people who look like them. So right now, the diversity is, it depends on where you are. But is there more possibility, right, that the more people you are bringing in, the more people you're thinking about on this team, even if they're content experts that are coming in and out. But even if I've got a grade level, right, with one person who's a person of color, more opportunity, right, for all kids at that grade level to have exposure to that particular person. We think teams allow for more adults to gain perspective about the strengths of students, more eyes on kids. If somebody leaves the following year, they're the one who knew that group of kids. In this case, there's a whole group of people, there's a whole team of people who actually know this group of kids. Distributed expertise means that a child doesn't have one teacher, but many, and many with different expertise who can teach in new and different ways. more experience to draw from, more relationships and interests to draw from. A team can also watchdog each other and each other's biases, that there is no more go in your classroom, shut the door, and what happens in my classroom happens in my classroom. The ability to personalize is more equitable and ensures that every student has the opportunity to learn, the ability to deepen learning. Teams allow teachers to try new things, improve working condition, to hopefully create a better learning environment for all students. Teams mean that, time is taken with individual behavior issues, don't take away from, learning from all. More adults around kids mean more opportunities, more doors open. And teams mean potentially no more days with a substitute, reducing teacher absenteeism, more learning time for students. Even if you have substitutes, right? The substitute isn't coming in as a lone teacher in a classroom, not quite sure what they're supposed to do, maybe having lesson plans, maybe not. Now they're coming into a team and they're part of that team. Now you're having actually better use of those substitutes if you need substitutes. There are some districts that are saying, hey, maybe I don't need substitutes. I could use that money to do a lot of other things. This is not without its challenges. Clearly, the most important thing, right, is that most of us did not go to school this way. And so kind of developing this vision, getting schools to think about this, seeing what kind of models are out there, I think is going to be very important. Understanding what this is and what it isn't. We're not talking about PLCs after school anymore. We're talking about people working together in real time. And space is an issue, but it really is getting people to move, getting them to think about spaces differently. We've had lots of examples of, we have a second grade level where they just cleared out all the furniture in a room and they said, look, this is where everybody's going to start in the morning, pre-COVID. But they use the other rooms then for different kinds of spaces, different ways to break kids up, different ways to think about small groups, different ways to work individually with kids. So it wasn't, the classrooms then became designed in different ways and space was used in different ways. And challenge 3 is always leadership. Right? It's always getting leaders on board that understand this and have a vision for it. So again, this is our anchor statement. We want to provide all kids with deeper and personalized learning by building teams of educators with distributed expertise. But we also want to empower educators by developing new opportunities for role-based specialization and advancement. And so this is really about not just the kids, it's also about the educators. It's about both. So again, the big idea is there's no one model. The school and community context here determines the model. And so rural schools are going to look different than urban schools, and they're going to need different kinds of skills and different kinds of people, right? Different kinds of adults, different kinds of specializations. But as we think about this workforce and the way that people come in and the way people are trained, now we're almost beginning to think about how do we personalize, right, the training for people so that so districts like you all can hire the people you need when you need them and get the kind of expertise you need, and not just be hiring one more widget teacher that walked out of a teacher prep program that had to try to know every single thing there is to know. We know that this is iterative work. Durable change moves at the speed of trust. And this is, we're moving as fast as we can. But we do understand, right, that this is, we'll see what happens and it'll change and people will do this in their own ways. And as long as it gets us at the end, right, to something that looks different and supports kids in some new and better ways, then I think we're moving forward. And the last thing is, again, this has to be good for students, families, and educators. Sometimes I think we focus a lot on students. Maybe we think about families, but we aren't thinking about these educators who are in these classrooms day in, day out, in really what has become an untenable, isolating job. And they're not staying, and it really is becoming problematic. And so we think about this as systems change, as a fundamental structural change. This is how we're moving on down the road. So thank you all very, very much for being here. And I appreciate your time and energy. And I know this is an incredibly difficult year. I know what it's like getting our university moving. I can only imagine what it's like right now in K-12.
Hey, Ray. Hey, Ray, why don't we open up to some questions? Deb Delisle, are you there? I know I saw some notes.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Do you want to start with a question? You and I are exchanging some chats and you're.
Yeah,
Would
that'd be
you,
great.
yeah, would you introduce yourself to everybody so people know who you are?
Okay, Deb Lyles, CEO and President of the Alliance for Excellent Education, formerly Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Ed and a state chief. Carole, I'm so excited to hear about this work. I had texted to Mort just the fact that one of my largest challenges as a commissioner in Ohio was trying to get higher ed to think differently about teacher preparation. You know, I feel like I was trained when the earth was still cooling in teacher prep, and I feel like most teacher prep programs are still like that. The one thing that came to me as a state chief, and Ray, you probably can relate to this, is trying to understand the typology context. So in the chat, I just had placed in a question around, you know, I think what you're doing is really great in terms of the context and understanding the specialties that are needed within grade level teams, et cetera. So how does typology play into it as well, recognizing that, for example, in rural and isolated regions, there are different kinds of strategies to use that may or may not be present in an urban setting. It doesn't mean their intent is not the same. It's just the context is a bit different.
Yeah, I think, well, again, look, context matters, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
work in urban, we work in rural, we work in tribal, different contexts, right? And I think that's what people have to figure out. I mean, we're going out to districts now and saying, who do you need? What do you need? You know, who are your kids? What are the biggest issues you're having? And so certainly lots of stuff around socio-emotional, lots of stuff around, you know, the opioid crisis is alive and well in our schools. There are lots of things, right, that districts then are coming to us, and that it then is incumbent on us to be flexible, nimble, figure out what's needed, figure out what these specializations are that we can offer, and build them in a way that, you know, that addresses some of these issues. So
Yeah.
there is no typology. Like the typology is like this very general, we've got red people and blue people and green people. I mean, it's what you saw.
Yeah.
I won't tell you that that's there's nothing specific to that. It's much more, we're just trying to get ahead of this and say to districts, you know, what do you need? What's the expertise you need right now?
Yeah.
And what's more important? Because, you know, I always tell people, I mean, there's a line around my office of people who want, you know, their thing in teacher preparation, and you just can't keep doing it.
Yeah, I really appreciate knowing that, particularly in the context, because I would often feel that, you know, having even taught in colleges of ed, that once those folks graduate, they should be able to be quote unquote experts in rural southeastern Ohio Appalachian schools, as much as Cleveland, as much as like high wealth districts outside of the large cities as well. So the context really does matter. Yeah, and I know, Ray, you've had that experience. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, and it's just hard for them to know it all. We just can't, I
Right.
mean, you have to think about the fact that, you know, all these kids coming out of our program, for the most part, not all of them, we've got graduate, we've got grad cert, where they're a little bit older, they're 22 years old. And look at what we're asking them to do and what they're up against in any kind of setting. It's very, very difficult. It has to change for them. They're not going to stay.
It's really interesting. And Deb, it was great for you to ask the question. What's really interesting is we were able, you know, this issue of equity and having teachers that represent the community. You know, when I was dean at SNHU, in a lot of the school districts, the paraprofessionals mirrored the community.
Absolutely.
And so we started building programs to get those people associate's degrees and give them credit for the work they were doing, and try to get them to be, you know, then we gave them credits to jump in and be certified and be able to use their job as their practicum. And so we felt like the only way we could mirror the community was to really build a stronger workforce from our paraprofessionals and our support staff, and elevate them to the point which I really loved, as you shared, Carole, the different kind of levels, and get these people in a position where the students see them as leaders and as authority. And it's not just, you know, that we create the growth in our own system. And I think schools are the place where maybe a lot of us have to start to think about, how do we grow that next next era of educators, and
Yeah.
it's got to come. I think we've got to work much closer with the schools.
Yeah, we're our big school. I don't know if Andy Forlis is on here, but I've got a shout out to Mesa Public Schools because Superintendent Andy Forlis said, look, we're going to make sure that at least 50% of our schools are what we call next education workforce schools in the next couple years. And so we're talking about all of this with them. But right now, I know that Mesa Public Schools is looking for almost 300 paraprofessionals.
Yeah.
And so this issue that they've got to come from the community, but how do you bring people in, right, as trainees? How do they come to us? How do we say, all right, look, in the next semester, we're going to help you get through 2 reading courses. And when you get through those, we're going to give you a stamp, right? And we're going to say, all right, you are now a reading accelerator, right? We name it, we give them value, we give them specialization, and that way it makes them more valuable. And then they're no longer a trainee. My kid works for Amazon right now. I mean, this is what you see in these big companies all the time. These kids come in right out of college. What do they do? They know what they do. And they bring them in and they say, okay, now we're going to train you up. We don't do it in education. We need to do more of it.
Hey,
So,
Ray, you're one of you're one of the few people, excuse me, who bridged having been a commissioner and a dean.
Yeah.
Your perspective is really
I
important.
can't keep a job.
Well, that's what I was thinking, but but we're glad that you didn't keep them so you could be here with us.
Yeah,
I know
thank
you put a colleague and friend of ours on the spot. Maurice, you've been putting a number of really important questions into the chat. And Ray, it's what you started saying about leadership. And so Carole, I wonder if Maurice could put his comments in the form of a question about leadership. I'm looking for me. There you are, Maurice.
Thanks, Mort. Hello, everyone. I was just really responding, Mort, so you put me on the spot.
Yep.
But, I was noticing the comments about walls, and I was thinking about the walls that are in the mind are often the hardest ones to break through or tear down. I love what Carole has shared about the team concept, and I really think it's doable if we tweak some structures and some processes, even within our own school system. Carole, any suggestions that you have on helping leaders get beyond the status quo or what they're used to doing in light of this? I think it's probably new to us as educators, but not new in the medical profession, possibly some other professions. I often think of the House method. If you watched House on TV, I think of a team approach to solving problems. So any thoughts on that, Carole?
well, it's interesting that you say that, Maurice, because some of this came from the fact that a number of years ago, I was in the emergency room at Mayo. I had the flu. Again, before there was something called COVID. We still got the flu, and they had a poster in there. And on that poster, it said, "Who's in my room?" And there were little boxes of people. Every person was wearing different colored scrubs, tops and bottoms mixed. And depending on the color of their scrubs, it told you who was in your room. But these were all the people, all the roles the people were playing to manage that entire group of patients. And this is the same thing, right? And so you find that what we have found is there's a group of teachers who hear these ideas. There are principals who hear these ideas and they go, pick me. And so you should pick them, right? And start with them and trying to figure some of this out. And then we've developed lots of tools and lots of ways of thinking about this. And we are talking, I think, later today with the AASA about how do we jointly create a network together around people who want to do this work. But I'm also looking at some of your comments, and you're absolutely right that the minute that you break down the one teacher, one classroom model, what it does is it begins to open doors for the change of other structures, the change in schedules, just the way people are working together, the way things are managed, all kinds of things then begin to change the minute that you change and you break down the one teacher, one classroom model. You can personalize learning, you can deepen learning, you can actually do some of the things that we've talked about forever around project-based learning, all the things we want to do that we have not been able to get to because these are such complex instructional skills that you can't do it in a one teacher, one classroom model. You can't do it.
Maurice, one of the things I would suggest is to, we use this term, smallify the problem, and what we try to do is sometimes take and do a big thing. I think one of the challenges of thinking about challenging the status quo is that if we can smallify it and build small models that are real and build them and then scale them, we can do that pretty quickly. But the idea is to try to launch it on the smallest level you can first, so that you get all of that that out of it, and it doesn't take you don't disrupt the entire system. The challenge always is we want to disrupt the entire system, but we have to do it in a way that makes it meaningful and that we're not compromising too much. But
Hey, we're talking about challenging the system. Andre Spencer asked a question about artificial intelligence and disrupting the system. Andre, could you pose that as a kind of question for all of us and to Carole?
Yes, hi everyone. Hey Mort, how are you?
Great to see you.
Great seeing you as well. So something that we're looking at our middle school level is bringing in artificial intelligence to really help us with the shaping of technology that fits into the work that's happening at Tesla or Samsung, some of the companies that we have right here in Austin. But I just wanted to get an understanding of like shaping that for middle schoolers and really putting them into a space of being able to engage some of these careers, but starting with the experiences in middle school. So some thoughts around that for how we can cultivate that type of program.
So it's a good thing to be thinking about, right? And the question is that, and I think this is this balance, right? We're expecting teachers to do that, and yet teachers don't have the background. They don't know the careers. They don't know the working environment. So the question is, how do you begin to capture people who are in the community, these content experts? How do you use the technology that we have today, with with Zoom or whatever, and begin to bring people in and out? And how do you make time for that? And how do you create schedules? And and how do you train those people? We've talked about training people as what we call problem-based mentors. And what does that look like for somebody to pour it into a classroom, say, hey, here's a problem I'm having today at work, right? We work with them on what that is, presenting that to kids so that kids begin to kind of see what that looks like. Teachers kind of taking that, working with kids, the person coming back, right? I mean, there's ways of now thinking about that if we can think more broadly about who educators are and the value that they bring.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andre, for the question. And it's wonderful to see you. Hey, Deb Bergeron, are you on? You asked a question about early learning. And I want to see if you could pose that as a question to Carole.
Sure. Yeah, this is Debbie. I am a former K-12 person, but have spent the last years in Head Start, early Head Start, and early learning, and have been trying to open the lines of communication and the connections between early learning and K-12 in a number of ways. But a lot of what you talked about, to me, the issues are only exacerbated in early ed in terms of workforce and preparation and all of those things. It's a lot of what I'm working on now with the National Head Start Association. And I'm just curious about your thoughts about how early learning plays a part here and how we can energize ourselves by creating this one trajectory sort of process rather than these siloed pieces of education.
Yeah, I think that's right, Deb. I think what's interesting though is I always look at early childhood and think in some ways they're already doing this because they have to, because of the ratios and the numbers, right? You always see multiple adults in the classrooms. Now, whether or not those people are trained in the right ways is really, is the question. But it's interesting to me, to think about that. But these are the barriers. There's a lot of comments too in the chat around regulatory, right? All of the regulations, all the certification requirements, all those things that kind of hamper people from doing some of this. But I think we've got to find ways of being able to break down those kinds of silos from very early on, all the way up. I mean, I have to say, we're even looking at this at the university level. So part of the change in teacher preparation is getting faculty to work in teams. Those of you who've been deans and worked in universities can imagine how difficult that is. But we also feel like we can't be talking about this with teacher candidates if we're not modeling it ourselves. So this is also a shift at at the higher ed level as well. So it's got to happen the whole way.
That's great.
Hey, Carole, there's so many questions popping up here, but I want to go back to something you said before, that what we're asking of 22-year-olds, and so in answer to Delilah's question, you said there's no typology, but is there some kind of stratification by years of experience, by sense of living and your life experience?
It's a good question. It's probably right. I mean, it's always been interesting, Mark, because we've had graduate certification programs, right? People who come back, it's their second career. When they say, hey, I'm done with being an accountant. I want to come back. I want to give back. I want to be a teacher. And they tend to stay, and they're incredible. What has always been amazing to me is that they will go in and do their residency just like a 22-year-old. But nobody ever talks to them about, what do you know? What's your expertise? What's your experience? Or actually utilizes that. And I think that's where, we've got to start to take stock of who people are and what their experiences are and what they bring to the table. It's not everything they've gotten in college, right? Because you've got lots of people coming with different kinds of strengths and experience. They're probably underutilized. And they need to be part of that typology. But as you're creating teams, now you have an opportunity to actually think about that. So I got somebody who's coming in as who's a former accountant or a former engineer who's coming in to teach whatever it may be. How do we actually utilize these people? How do we put them on teams? How do they share their knowledge? How do they provide kids with career experience and expertise that others don't have because they've been career teachers? Not that that's a bad thing, but.
Yeah, it's always the challenge we have when we start bringing those second career people in, is we look at them and say, well, you've got to take a respite from a job and spend 8 to 10 weeks, being unemployed and being poor. And so that's one of the big challenges that we start to play with, and, bringing in the ideas that I think you shared, Carole, are great, because, do we really have to do that? Can districts become the providers of that experience, and we pay those people for that time that they're in the school? We have them, we engage them as community representatives or community specialists, and we value all that.
Yeah. I mean, we're critical, right? We're critical of TFA. Yeah. We're critical of any alternative cert, because districts hire them because they need to hire them. Yeah. The fact is, those people are probably not ready to be in a classroom by themselves. And yet that's what we do, because that's the structure we have. Yeah. But if we were to bring them in and say, here's the expertise they have around their content knowledge, whatever that is, right? They still don't have all the pedagogical knowledge we would love for them to have. But let's not put them in a classroom by themselves. Exactly. Let's not take a 22-year-old and put them in a classroom by themselves. What are we doing? Yep. Why is it okay that they're in their car crying in October? That whole thing, of like, we tell, it's like the big induction thing, like, oh, sorry, you're going to be in your car crying in October. Like, why? Put them on a team, build teams, do something different, build people around them, as well as the kids. We do this in all other kinds of organizations. But we could solve some of these problems around alt-cert and the problems with alt-cert, and people have subject matter expertise, bring them in, but they may not have all of the instructional knowledge. But okay, we'll get there. But they got to be on a team. They shouldn't be with a group of kids by themselves. No, they shouldn't. And we have, I know out there on the screen somewhere is Ken Wallace from Maine Township, and they take several of their teachers each year and free them up so that they can be coaches, and it's just a great experience. Ken, do you want to comment at all about how you're using your teachers to train?
New
So
people?
I actually just put it in the chat. So the teachers,
I didn't see that. So
that's okay. That's okay. But when you come to work for Maine, first of all, our new teachers are part of a new 4-year cohort. So we're actually teaching them, coaching them, mentoring them in high impact strategies. But then they also have an individual coaching plan. We're in our 8th year of that, but that extends throughout their career. So I think, Carole, the points you were making earlier really resonated with this idea of creating a learning environment for continuous growth. And what's shifted for us is we didn't used to hire 22-year-olds right out of college, but we've had big classes of them recently. And we have found that building a really enriching support system around them, they can really be successful from day one. But you're exactly right. You know, teaching humans is incredibly complex. And it isn't, you know, most people aren't really ready at 22. You don't know till you get there, and you need a lot of support. But Ray's been here to see what we do, and we're pretty proud of it.
Hey, Ray, before we bring Linda on, I'm looking to see if she's here yet. There's a place we're all going to take a field trip to. As one of the Learning Network districts. Commissioner Barry Benjamin is from the Virgin Islands. And
yes.
Yes, and her hand is up, and I want to make sure we give her a chance to ask her a question. Thank you for joining us today, Commissioner.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with the team from the VI Department of Education. And my question is around group accountability. Teachers are evaluated on an individual basis right now. And with this new model, we're seeking to evaluate, I'm assuming, on a group basis. So are there any discussions taking place
Yes.
or even models that exist for group evaluation? Thank you.
We're getting there. We're talking to NIET about this. So I think it's both, right? There's still an individual component, but what does it look like to have a team component? There's a lot of work that's come out of business over the years, right? Around teams and around assessing teams and team performance and, lots of stuff there. But it is on our radar because we realize that we have to get there. We've got to look at learning environment as part of that too. We've looked at Elliott. So we've looked at it. We're looking at a number of different instruments and how can we tweak them and how do we start thinking about both the individual and then how people work on teams and then how does the team actually function. That's going to take some work, but it's definitely on our list.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ray, I think Linda has joined us. I want to make sure that we give her the time.
Yes.
She's on a tight schedule. Carole, you are amazing and you've stirred so many questions. I just want to repeat what you said before. We're going to talk later today, you and I and Tammy Campbell, but we're going to try to create a community of practice within this group to pick up on the ideas that you shared today to figure out how we move ahead with them. And I want to thank Dan for introducing you to me and making the partnership with AACTE. I just think it's really an important, exciting conversation. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Mort. Thanks, Dan. Everybody
Thanks,
else.
Carole.
Have a
Thank
good
you
day.
so
I
much.
put my email in the chat. Just send a note. Thanks so much. Bye.
Linda, I'm looking for your face, but I'd be happy to hear you. But there you are.
There she is.
Hey, Linda, it is so great to have you join us today. Thank you. I'm going to do a real short introduction because so many people here are just eager to hear your voice and to get your sense of the world. But I do want to do a very brief introduction. Last time I introduced you, I forgot to say that in addition to being at Stanford, in addition to being at LPI, you are the state board president in California. And the reason I mention that today is because it's consistent with what we're doing as a group of educators across the country. It's nice to have theory, it's nice to have research, but it's important to have action. And I think your voice over the decades and to this day have been focused on moving from theory and policy to action. And I don't know what better job there could be in the world unless you tell me differently, although it's probably, drives you crazy on a daily basis. But to be able to move the wonderful work you've done over the years into action and to be part of our work here at Learning 2025 is such an honor. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your thoughts about learning, teaching, moving ahead, science of learning, and anything else you want to talk about for the next 5 hours.
Well, maybe for a half hour. But I'm excited about the work that you're doing and so glad to be partnering in it. And I do want to pick up on a thread that was really an interesting thread in the conversation before I got here, which was the thread about how do we prepare teachers. And just to let you know, I mean, among the things that I've been working on both in California and I was privileged to lead the Biden transition team, is this idea of how do we get people into classrooms who are able to be fully and clinically prepared, but take advantage of the skills that they bring and make sure they don't have to go into poverty for it. So some of you probably are aware of residency program models that are, cropping up a little bit around the country, where you can bring someone in for a year of preparation. Often these are folks who've come either already been through college or been through other careers or professions, tuck them in under the wing of some of the most expert teachers or co-teaching in a classroom while they're getting a credential from a partnering organization, pay them a salary or a stipend while they're there, free tuition. And so in California, we're using some of our ARPA money and much state money, $250 million to put residencies in place across the state where there are shortages. And in the federal government, the funding for those programs under the Teacher Quality Partnership Grants has also been increased about tenfold in the current budget. So just to make people aware that there are resources, some states are putting state money or ARPA money into this, and some districts are as well, just so that we can begin to solve the problem that that everybody's known about for a long time and that you were all talking about. So anyway, you asked me to say a little bit about the work that we're doing on the science of learning and development. Is my screen being shared?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Click in the middle of the screen if you'd like to advance the slides, or you can just prompt me and I'll do it for you.
Oh, so you put them up. Okay. I was trying to share my screen, but it wasn't working. Yeah, you could just move them. So, one of the things that I'm thrilled to be working on and with AASA is the work that you've done on Learning 2025 and the work that some folks, myself at the Learning Policy Institute, Turnaround for Children, the Forum for Youth Advancement, Sold Alliance, have been working on similarly to sort of say, what does the science of learning and development allow us to know and do around teaching and learning, and how those have come together. So if you want to just go ahead and advance the slide to the next one quickly, I think you can hit that again. I have a lot of animations in the slide, so you can please hit the cursor again. Oh, we're not going to have, there we go. So I think this is a moment which we all recognize that, with the ongoing public health crisis, economic crisis in many communities, the climate crisis, the civil rights crisis, we've seen the inequities both in the system and the inadequacies of our systems, including education. You can go to the next slide. And these kinds of moments do lead to big social changes. So I think the time is right, and I think it's the impulse that has probably driven the Learning 2025 initiative for AASA, the Science of Learning and Development initiative that I've been involved with, that have converged with similar ideas and principles. And I think the moment to do a lot of this work, as you've been discussing, is right now. Next slide. One of the parents that we talked to in doing a Restart and Reinvent education publication really said it well: reprioritize This is the time to see if something can be different. To reset the system, we have to take a loss, but we can recoup the loss if we actually get kids excited about education and create a more positive space for them to learn. And as you were just discussing, this is going to take a lot of changes in the system as a whole. And as a state board member, I feel both educated about the many rules and regulations we've accrued over the 100 years of our existing system, and all there is to do to change that set of regulations, as well as to create the work that you're creating in schools and districts. We can go to the next slide. So, a lot of what's needed is really well described in the American Imperative, the new vision of public schools that AASA just put out a few months ago. And when I read it, and Mort and I talked, it was amazing to me that the complete convergence between that, and if you go to the next slide, the work that we were doing on restarting and reinventing schools. And so how we use this time to support the systemic change. You can keep hitting the cursor. This is why it's easier for me to control the slides, but we'll keep going, keep hitting the cursor. Thank you. And the thing that I think we're all recognizing is that 100 years ago, we were inventing schools in this country as people were moving from the one-room rural schoolhouse on the farm to industrial urban settings, building schools organized very explicitly around the assembly line. We had multiple assembly lines and conveyor belts for different kids who were identified as having different paths or aspirations in life. A lot of that was racialized or determined by ethnicity and economic background, immigration status, and so on. All of that was going on while we were also developing standardized tests. The first standardized tests were developed in the middle of the eugenics movement by some of the people who were actively involved in the eugenics movement. And the bell curve was invented to array everyone on a single dimension so that we could select and sort people on that single dimension. And that set of standardized testing principles and psychometrics has followed us to this very day and still determines a lot of what goes on in schools. Those schools were not designed to support relationships particularly. We were going to put kids on a conveyor belt and see a different teacher every year in the elementary schools, and then a different teacher every 45 minutes in the middle schools and the high schools. They weren't designed for the deeper learning we're trying to get at today, the personalized supports, or for equitable opportunity and achievement. And all of those shortcomings, I think, are recognized in one way or another in AASA's report and in the reports that we've been working on as well. The next slide. So as we think about reinventing school, in our frame for it, we were saying that it focuses on authentic learning and equity and harnesses the knowledge of human development, learning, and effective teaching accumulated over the last century and needed for the next. And so much of what's been passed down as conventional structure, conventional practice, conventional wisdom is not really in sync with what we now know about human learning and development. I think back to when I came into teaching, I was a high school teacher in a couple of different big factory model warehouse high schools, where I realized that I could not, I wasn't planning around my kids with other teachers. I was not able to really control their experience once they got out of my classroom. I tried to make it an oasis, but then they went out into the world and lots of things happened to them. I realized that I didn't have the knowledge base I needed to do what I needed for every one of my kids. I had kids in high school who couldn't read. I didn't have the tools to teach them to read in my English class, etc. And I remember being told things like, don't smile until Christmas. Be sure you have your list of do's and don'ts, mostly don'ts, all the things that if you do this in my classroom or if you do this in our school, you will get in trouble for it. So this whole very punitive frame that we've had inherited was part of what I was being trained on, and we now know so much more about what actually enables people to learn that we need to redesign schools around. Next slide. So in the science of learning and development, there have been these breakthrough, keep hitting the cursor. There have been several big syntheses of the knowledge base that have been published in scientific journals, including one on the implications for practice of the science of learning and development. I was involved in that particular one. And it has been downloaded around the world 650,000 times. So there's an appetite for this, body of learning. You can go to the next slide. Some of you also know about the work of the SEED Commission, the Social, Emotional, and Academic Development Commission, which also was building a lot on the knowledge base of the brain basis for integrating social, emotional, and academic development. You can go to the next slide. And some of the principles that we, have emerged around is that, first of all, the brain is always developing. That's good news for those of us as we're later in life, because our brains are continuing to produce new neuron connections based on our relationships and experiences. This is true for kids. They are not baked and done when they are born. They're not baked and done even by kindergarten. The early childhood people point to all the neuron development in the early years, but it continues. Adolescence is another time of huge growth in brain architecture, that those relationships and experiences make a huge difference, that learning is social, emotional, and academic. They all go together. And if you can conceptualize the classroom that way, as you guys were saying, it makes a huge difference in learning, that children actively construct their knowledge by connecting it to what they are learning. And that's always done within a cultural context, which is why culturally affirming and connected learning is so much more necessary and successful for everyone. Everyone has some various kinds of cultural contexts and experiences. Students' perceptions of their own ability influence learning. So if I come to believe I'm bad at math, if I don't think I can read, that actually undermines my capacity to do those things. Tracking systems that start early in elementary school set up the presumption that some kids are inherently more gifted or able than others. Kids take that in, they lock it in, it's meaningful in their learning process. Adversity affects learning, and schools, of course, need to be healing oriented. And of course, the most effective antidote to trauma is relationships. We're going to have to be really sensitive to that as kids are coming back from the ongoing trauma of the pandemic. So the next slide. We're really trying to build environments where kids are experiencing much less cortisol, which, floods the brain in ways that disrupt neuron connections, that disrupt the capacity to focus and to think, and to, in fact, flood the brain with oxytocin, which promotes the development of the brain. It promotes the capacity to learn in terms of sort of intelligences, and it gives you an opportunity with a clear brain to take in information and learn more effectively. Next slide. So we've been working on this guiding principles for equitable whole child design. I want to thank our colleagues at AASA who were involved, and in other organizations. Deb, I know Deb Delisle's on here because I heard her talking earlier, and she and others have been involved as well as advisors on this project. And basically taking all of this synthesis of this enormous body of neuroscience, learning science, et cetera, hundreds and hundreds of studies, and sort of saying, what do they mean for schools? 5 big areas that are shown on this blue wheel inform a set of design principles for schools that we hope to work with those who are engaged in the 2025 implementation work as a tool and a support for, I like Gary's comment in the chat. That the 5 big areas are: how do we build schools around positive developmental relationships, environments that are filled with safety and belonging, rich learning experiences that develop deeper learning and knowledge, skills, habits, and mindsets that support social, emotional, and cognitive functioning, and then, of course, integrated student supports that make what kids need available when they need it. And when I think about that, I always think about my trips to Finland. I had a chance to do some research in several countries where in Finland, they're so focused on child development, and everyone is so trained in it. From, of course, there's free childcare, from infancy on, as parents need or want it, all the way into school. Formal school doesn't start until the age of 6 or 7. And it's all very focused on what everyone knows that kids need to be productive. But in elementary school, about 50% of kids get what we would think of as one or another kind of special education service. They get what they need when they need it, immediately, without a whole bunch of SST teams and, psycho ed evaluations and, processes that slow down getting them any services. If they're having trouble reading, they immediately get a tutorial. If they're having trouble with speech and language, they immediately get that help. There's a lot of training for all teachers. They get all trained in a 2-year master's program with a lot of clinical experience and research experience about the knowledge base for learning. And then they have specialists as well. But kids are just getting looked at and supported in every imaginable way. And by the time they get to high school, almost nobody is in special education because they got what they needed when they needed. And so part of our challenge is building schools where we break down all of the procedures that our laws and regulations have gotten in the way of us serving kids immediately in the ways that they need to be served. So the next slide you could go to. So we've got this new K through 12 playbook. As I say, many of you were involved in helping us develop this. As a user guide, you can just keep hitting the cursor and we'll see what comes up. It does provide sort of the background of the science in these areas, structures that schools can put in place to support those practices, and then a set of practices as well. Lots of videos, vignettes, and illustrations of practice for those coming from schools and districts around the country that have been doing this work. In some cases for a long time. There's an interactive website that's going to be available in about a week or so, which then has all of this in various downloadable forms with graphics and vignettes and videos and a resource library. And we want to make it available for those who want to use it in. This may be something that can be a tool over the course of a year, chapter by chapter, piece by piece. There'll be a rubric that schools can use to sort of see where they, and districts can use to see where they are vis-a-vis these things. And then a community of practice, a network of practice to work on with it. And this is just sort of showing the playbook chapters that, match with what I talked about. So you can go to the next slide. And just to give you one example, so around developmental relationships and learning environments that support success, obviously we want to get to these trusting relationships and emotional connections and physical and emotional safety, a sense of belonging, all of which make people more intelligent. They literally build the architecture of the brain. And when we can do this in classrooms, it actually helps kids to learn much more effectively. Some of you know the meta-analyses that were done of social and emotional learning programs that found gigantic effects on academic achievement from attention to social and emotional supports and learning, actual skills that kids themselves can use to support their own ability to manage their emotions and their attention and work well with others, etc. So the next slide shows that to do that, we need to build new structures in schools. We need to redesign schools to create opportunities for caring. Teachers and school leaders care deeply and are finding lots of ways to show that caring. But when we're in structures that don't support it, then we're working against the grain. When I had 180 kids in high school as a teacher who was not working in a team, and didn't have block scheduling, and didn't have a small learning community, and didn't have an advisory structure so that there would be a family group for each of my students that we could use to connect to the home and to convene teachers. When we didn't have those things, we could not care effectively for students, no matter how much we cared deeply and could manage to reach a few of them. So the school structures that are needed also then can support certain classroom practices, which we then sort of try to illustrate and provide resources for people to access and learn. Next slide. I don't know if we have time for this, but just to give you a sense, there are a set of Edutopia videos that were created for the playbook, for this project. One of them is on the power of relationships in schools. And if we have a moment, it's I think only 2 minutes to share it. It gives you a sense of some of the tools that we could build on with our staffs.
You had so much to offer yesterday. You okay? I'm tired. So what's going on?
Strong relationships are central to the learning process. What the science of learning and development tells us is that we need to create learning environments which allow for strong long-term relationships for children to become attached to school and to the adults and other children in it.
When children have experiences of closeness and consistency and trust, oxytocin is released. Oxytocin has many, many positive effects on the development of the brain. So when we think about a relationship, we're not just talking about being nice to a child. We're talking about a child having an experience of attunement and trust strong enough to release the hormone oxytocin.
Good morning, Ariella. How you doing today?
The purpose of the morning greeting is to connect with them and to just make sure that I'm seeing them as humans. Like I'm making that relationship with them, making that bond.
I prioritize relationship building because getting to know them is the best part of the job.
When I come in the morning, we usually talk about things that are happening in our community.
We're trying to build caring and respect.
The teacher is trying to understand who I am and my values as a person.
When I have a free 45 minutes or an hour, I think to myself, I could sit down and catch up on Grady, or I could go and make connections, whether it's a smile or a joke or a reminder. It validates their presence in the building.
Rock it out in the art room. It starts from so much honesty and transparency with kids. It's really easy to strive to be this like idealized, always ready to go elementary school teacher, and that's not real and that's not human. When people start talking about other things while I'm still giving directions, it feels frustrating for me and I have to take a breath. My students connect most with me when they see that I also struggle and I also have challenges. It takes a lot of vulnerability on my part.
Total familiarity. When that student knows that you care about them, when they know that you're a human, let's think about that. Their academic performance in your class is going to be better.
If I'm comfortable around them, then I'm more confident around them, and it's easier to ask questions and things like that.
So when you're looking at this graph, what is it that you think happened?
Some teachers I don't always get along with the best, so then sometimes I'm like, I can't do it, so I'm just not gonna do it. But when I like the teacher, I want to do their work. I'll be like, I can learn this.
You all have done outstanding work.
Emotion and learning are completely connected. If you're in a positive emotional space, if you feel good about yourself, your teacher, that actually opens up the opportunity for more learning.
Good to see.
So that was about the power of relationships in schools, and there are, as I said, about 20 of those videos that were made by Edutopia for this project, and that I hope will be useful tools as school leaders are working with their faculties and staffs around different concepts and constructs that we really have both articulated in the Learning 2025 initiative and the Soul Design Principles initiative that fits so neatly together. And so I'll just close by saying, I think the power of relationships also is important in educational renewal. We all know the proverb, if you want to go quickly, go alone, and if you want to go far, to go together. And we are looking forward to working with AASA and with the school districts that want to be part of this learning network for the 2025 Commission follow-up and implementation, and providing some of the resources that might prove to be helpful in that regard. And you can stop sharing the screen.
Linda, do you have time for a couple questions?
Sure, yeah.
Ray,
that was great. I was watching the chat box, and there's a lot of people that were so excited. And anyway, do I have any people anybody out there that wants to ask a question? Linda, before we move along?
Oh, that's nobody.
They're all in shock and awe.
Well, I want to say this, Mort. How do you ask Linda a question? But I do want to say, Linda, you may not remember this, but in Birmingham in 1984, 85, you were working with Birmingham City Schools. I was starting my first year as teacher, as a high school math teacher. And I remember you speaking to the Board of Education. And it's just a blessing to see you after all these years and all the work that you've done and how your work has benefited my career and the work that we do with our children. Just wanted to share that.
Oh, that is so awesome. And look how you got all grown up.
Yes, ma'am.
And now leading a school system. I love it. That is awesome.
Yeah, actually, pretty remarkable. Anybody else?
Hey, Mort, it's Debbie again. I'm gonna
Deb Bergeron, let's complete your bio. You were the federal director of Head Start for 4 years. So now go ask your question.
Go ahead.
Well, I just want to bring this circle because I think, during our last conversation, the comment was made that we already do this in early learning, creating teams and that kind of thing, because out of necessity. A lot of what we just talked about is essential in early learning as well. So I would just say to everybody that it was a big light bulb moment for me after 30 years and really just solely K-12 to discover this magic that exists in this space that is sometimes not valued. I mean, I'm just going to say it. It's often thought of as less, I don't know about less important, but just maybe a little easier or whatever. But trying to link early learning to K-12 and create this smooth trajectory, to me, is a game changer in so many ways. So I'm just saying that to these people who are these 253 people that are here. We have the early learning cohort that is working really hard on that here at AASA. And then the new family engagement cohort that I'm leading that is all about how do we learn what we know works about creating relationships with people and spread that through the K-12 system. So that's my little soapbox, sorry.
Can I reinforce a couple of points that Deb just made? First of all, there is so much amazing practice in early learning that needs to find its way sort of to push up into the grades rather than the grades pushing down, a much more artificial mode of learning on preschool. When I was teaching, I've taught for years in teacher education, and one of my student teachers, who was a high school student teacher, was complimenting my teaching and said, you teach like a high school teacher, which they meant in a nice way. And I said, well, when I get good, I'll teach like a preschool teacher. So I'm still working on that, because the capacity to know what every learner, is thinking and understanding and how they learn, and what is the next thing that in their zone of proximal development will allow them to take those next steps towards development. We lose a lot of the developmental framework and insight as we go up through the grades. We think it's just about, me telling you the content rather than me, bringing the curriculum to the child and the child to the curriculum. So a lot of what we know from the science of learning and development is that, all the way up the grades, we need to look more like early childhood. The other thing I'll just note is that we just in California have enacted TK for transitional kindergarten, as we call it, for all 4-year-olds. So we will have a full year of preschool for all of our children in the state. And we've been looking at this question of how to align the standards. And one of the things we're really looking at is, if you look at the Common Core standards, which we adopted, and they have been in many ways a very useful tool for us in California, but the standards in kindergarten are not something, I think there are challenges with those. that you would not want to push down. And we really need to take our preschool framework and see how we push that up as a way of doing some of that alignment. And so we need to think really critically about that. And so I just want to reinforce Deb's points about A, the importance of preschool, and B, the importance of the way excellent early childhood educators teach in that context and how we can all learn from it.
Linda,
Hey, Mort.
Mort,
this is Deb Delisle. Can I just ask, Linda, you know how much of a fan I am of yours. I had to think if we can have every state to have a Linda, if we can clone you, our country would be in a much better place. But I know you are limited with time, but can you talk a little bit? There were a lot of things in the chat room before you, or maybe you hopped on or you saw the chat room, around so many changes that have to occur with state licensing and state legislation, et cetera. Do you have any quick ideas or things that actions you've already taken in California so that we can enact some of these things across the states? Because we're so, the states are so limited what can happen at the actual district level due to state legislation or the state licensing programs.
Well, we are
Thanks,
doing
Linda.
something, thank you. And I think, I'd love to hear this from folks in other states too, because I really believe in R&D, rip off and disseminate. So I'm always looking for, what other people are doing that we can bring in. So I'm always learning from other states as well. But we have done a couple of things that I think could be helpful to others. One of the things we just did was we issued a set of guidance for digital learning that also includes power standards for the English language arts and math Common Core, and takes that whole bevy of standards, because Deb, we were trying to get to fewer, higher, and deeper. We didn't do so well on the fewer side. We still have a lot of standard statements, but if you look at them, if you look at them, there are a few big ideas in each grade level that if you put those at the center as maypoles, the other little standards dance around them, and you can then go deeper and do more inquiry-oriented teaching. So we did just publish that. I think it's a brilliant piece of work. I'd love to spread it to anybody else who wants to use it at the district level. It's for our districts or at the state level. And I think we should be thinking about how to share across the country as we do this.
Yep, we really should.
Hey, Linda, I want to end with a question from Mary Templeton, who doesn't know she asked the question, but I think it's so central to what you're saying, if I'm hearing Mary's question correctly. And it's central to the commission's recommendation. Kathy Hoffman, the commissioner, the secretary in Arizona, only joined when we committed to the question about student voice. And Karen Garza from Battelle for Kids and Pam Cantor is on today. All of our commissioners committed to this concept. Mary, could you end, I think we should end with a question about students, if you would, please.
Sure. I was just so compelled by the student testimonial that he said, if I know the teacher likes me or I like the teacher, I'm going to do the work. That is so critical. Asking students what is their perception, their lived experience of the educational system, critical. Anyway, thank you, Linda, just lovely.
Thank you. Well, and I think, seeing these kinds of little videos, even, I've been teaching for 40 years. I learn every time I see one of those. I think having faculty reflect on that together and how can we both hear from our students and figure out what enables them to have that feeling could be really powerful. I just have to say, I'm so glad Pam Cantor is here. I didn't realize she would be here. The reason these two documents converge so much is because Pam was on your 2025 commission and she was a key author of the design principles for the science of learning and development. And you saw her in the little video. So there's a lot of organic connection here. And I think we'll find lots of ways to build on that as we work together.
Well, I just want to go ahead, Maud.
No, right. I wanted to say goodbye in a positive way, but if you have something else you want to add.
No, I just wanted to say the same thing. She created, the two speakers today have created so much energy around Learning 2025. And I see, 100+ school districts gathered together. And what an energy that we could create in education as we think about 100 districts kind of focused together on similar pieces of this work and how we can share. Just watching the sharing going on in these conversations is very powerful. something that we really need in education to drive home what we need to do for kids.
And Linda, we so much appreciate you joining us today and sharing your support of our work at ASA, just as we support your work as a partner at LPI. And Dan and Bill and Ray and Valerie and Linda, I just want you to know that moving forward for the 100+ districts, the 270 people or 80 people who started on the call today, that we are committed to working together. This is about taking action, not having, one of my new favorite words, some document collecting cyber dust on a shelf somewhere. So the fact that you're here today, Linda, gives us hope that your amazing life body of work, including Maurice Beasley, you can count him now as part of your body of work and life, is helping all of us move ahead in a very positive way. And your work, LPI, and you yourself and your team will be threaded during the course of the year. It's just not a once and see you, have a nice year. Is it, Linda?
No, we're going to be with you. So great to see you all, and I will see you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Linda. And we're going to take, at this point in time, we're going to break everybody off into groups. And it's going to be randomly done, but this is done for a reason. It's kind of that networking opportunity. And could I have my slide with the questions up on the screen from somebody in the world of tech? So one of the key strategies, I should say, about all of this work is all of us together, working together. And so we're going to send you off for about 15 minutes. That's all the time we actually have to have a conversation. There are 2 breakout questions. They'll show up in your breakout room. But from the information shared with you today, where do you feel the most energy and enthusiasm? We'd like to learn about that. And what district level needs surface as top priorities. And so the way we're going to do it is we're going to toss you all into breakout rooms, and the person's birthday who is closest to Halloween, which is October 31st, if you could just throw some notes in the group chat that you're going to be in, that way we'll be able to capture some of the ideas and the content that you're going to be talking about in your breakouts. So it's going to be 15 minutes in the breakout. Introduce yourselves quickly. About 5 to 7 people will be in each room. You'll see the breakout questions, but really just to share some of your thinking around question 1 or question 2, have somebody drop it into the chat box. That'll be a very exciting time for us. So with that, I'm going to say abracadabra and rub my head on the top and then rub my stomach at the same time. And you should all go off into your breakout rooms. 151, give me 152, 152. Anyone with 152?
I see you started or fell back down on 151.
Yeah, that's all right. We're good. Hey, it's great to have everybody back. Mort, do you want to
Yeah, I'm just curious, picking up on a theme that Valerie Truesdale and our team was talking about during our session, our time together when you were all in your breakout rooms. How many of you are from Western Pennsylvania? Can we see your hands or like wave hello? So the suggestion is, because Greg Baer and Grable Foundation is so closely connected to our work, and that's part of the Fred Rogers Institute. So Ray and I volunteered. No, I think Ray volunteered with Valerie to sing "It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood."
I don't think that's true.
That is not true.
That's what I heard. Is that
That
not
is
correct?
not the way to finish a Linda Darling-Hammond, right? Carole Basile speech, and
it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Not if I sing it.
Hey, so Ray, I'm going to give it to you in a second. Let me turn to my colleague at ASA, Valerie Truesdale. Most of you know Valerie. She's brilliant. She's wonderful. Her bio is as long as my very long arms. But she and I are working on creating the professional learning series for the course of this year. And she's going to give you a preview and some information about how to get involved with this as we go look forward. And then Ray's going to take us home without song.
Without song.
Hi, everybody. What an invigorating day today has been, hasn't it? It's been a little bit of a depressing time in our country with everything going on with masks and other things. So I'm, for one, can tell you that I'm totally uplifted by being with all of you all today. In our next professional learning series item for our AASA Learning 2025 network, We will be together on September the 28th from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern, and Tim Shriver will be with us. I put all this in the chat. We would like to feature 3 districts and your story on becoming more student-centered, equity-focused, and future-driven. If you would like to participate in an Ignite, please send me a note in the chat or an email, vtruesdale@aasa.org. It's also in the chat. We'd love to feature 3 districts and learn from you. How are we doing? How are you growing? And how might the others support you? We'll send you the protocol for the Ignite session via email, and we'll post it in Canvas. Following today's session, we will send you a little note thanking you, as well as providing a poll. We want to find out, do you self-identify as rural, suburban, urban, or mixed, so that we can begin to put you into groups when we come together for chat sessions and begin to learn from each other. Thanks, everybody. Be safe.
Hey, thanks,
Great.
Valerie. And we're really excited about the opportunity. I want to thank all of the groups that that took a copy of their notes from their breakout and paste them into the chat box here in this session. I've been noticing all of those being put in. That's a great help to us. That helps us keep track of what your interests are, where you're going. The other thing is, any of the districts, after today's event, if you've got some ideas and thoughts, share them with the senior consultant that you have been assigned, or share them with myself or Mort or Valerie or any of the team at AASA, so that we know how to provide support and services to you in the in-between times. We're excited about the big launch on September 28th. I'm very excited about it. And I just want to wrap this up and bring it to a close by saying to you, at the start of this meeting, I said, leadership at its core is about making other people better as a result of your presence. And I just want you to get a sense of that having Linda and having Carole today, their presence, really made us, as I looked around, made me as well feel really excited to be part of this work. And then the key to that quote I shared with you is making sure that the impact lasts in your absence. They're gone, right? They left the screen, and we're here. We've got that responsibility. And as Mort and Dan and Bill said in the very beginning, this is about action. We got to take some of these ideas and actually input them in our system. And I would suggest, again, to smallify your big challenges. Make them small, get them to fit in a system where you can play with them, nurture them, and then grow them. It's kind of like when we start to grow our gardens, we put the seed in the little pod and let it get its start carefully, and then take it outside. I'm excited about working with you all. Mort, it's been fun sharing the screen with you today and facilitating this work. Valerie, you've always been so good. And Debbie and Adina, I just can't say enough about the support you guys provide us. Anyway, look, we're excited. Can't wait to see you all. And I'm just going to say, enjoy the start of the school year. We'll see you all back in September, and enjoy. Anything more?
Be well, stay healthy.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Care for one another.
3:59, 4 o'clock. Look at that, right on the button.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.